Hundreds of banks are at risk of failure right now. And the reason why I say that is because CNBC is reporting it, the mainstream business media. And why is it important? Well, it's important because it's actually not hundreds. I believe you're going to see way over 1,000 banks fail in this next cycle. But these are the ones that analysts are watching. They're expecting them to fail. And I'm going to show you how banks like JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, running that bank, and other big banks are going to benefit from that. So this is out of CNBC. It's entitled "Why Hundreds of U.S. Banks May Be at Risk of Failure." It says hundreds of small and regional banks across the U.S. are feeling stressed. You could see some banks either fail or at least, dip below their minimum capital requirements. Christopher Wolf, managing director and head of North American banks at Fitch Ratings, just told CNBC this. It says consulting firm Carlos Group analyzed about 4,000 U.S. banks and found 282 banks face the dual threat of commercial real estate loans and potential losses tied to higher interest rates. Now, the other day I did a story about how we're not talking about banks. The other day I was talking about private lenders, lending houses, right? Not banks. We're going out and repurchasing as many of these distressed loans as possible, because if the losses stack up too high because they've already securitized them and put them out onto the stock market so that pension funds can invest in them. See, you're already seeing the repeat of 2008 building up. It's frothing over right now. If these losses get too high on the collateralized loans that they collateralized, they're going to lose the ability to take money for servicing these loans, okay? So now these are banks we're talking about. And just so you know, the big banks are foaming at the mouth for this event to happen. And the reason why is because they get to cherry pick during a crisis. When a bank falls, like this bank that I'm sitting in front of right now, if this bank was to fall, the Fed would come in and force a liquidation of their assets. The crappy assets go to nothing and the investors lose. The good assets, especially the depositors, the deposits are the most important thing. They get to go to the big banks for nothing. The big banks are looked at as a savior, but really they're not, all right? And this is done on purpose because the largest banks in the country have ownership in the Federal Reserve. It's this big, huge, massive scheme that's going on. Now, it says here in CNBC, the majority of the banks are smaller lenders with less than $10 billion in assets. Now, to explain that a little better, we've all seen what just happened with New York Community Bank. They actually just came out with a more quarter one. They just put out their quarter one numbers, obviously massive losses. They're cutting their dividend, right? Well, that's because all of that, they used to be in this realm of smaller banks, under $100 billion in assets. When they purchased assets from Silicon Valley Bank, they all of a sudden were under the spotlight or the magnifying glass even more, okay? So these small banks with 10 billion in assets, a lot of people wouldn't care about them. Here's the scary thing. Those banks are the backbone of our country's lending. They're the ones that do teaser rates and loans that a lot of big banks wouldn't do. When you go to a big bank, let me give you an example. Chase, to my best of my knowledge, they do not offer a money market account. They offer wealth management services, but not a money market account. Where you go to a smaller bank and they offer these kind of services. There's a diversity in banking services when we have a lot of banks. And as more and more of these banking crises happen, like 1987, 1994, 2007 to 2008, and now we're coming into this next cycle, which is a really big banking collapse cycle, we're going to find less and less opportunities to get our money to grow, all right? Because the big banks, the more powerful they get, the larger they get, the less they're going to offer you. And there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. And that's what's really scary. In the last 100 or so years, about 115 years, the Federal Reserve has had this plan to slowly shut down the banking system and make their bank the biggest. And it's still hidden. Most people don't realize this, that the Federal Reserve is owned by a handful of massive banks in the US. But it's still this clamping down of our banking system, and that's what's scary. Now, back to the story. It says here, most of these banks aren't insolvent or even close to insolvent. This is the key. Watch this. They're just stressed. Brian Graham, co-founder and partner of Carlos Group, told CNBC. That means there'll be fewer bank failures. It's not true. But it doesn't mean that communities and customers don't get hurt by that stress. All right, so let me explain that. When we talk about the stress, it's because a certain percentage of the banks, these smaller banks, the 10 billion in assets and under, their portfolios are held in commercial real estate. Some are fixed rate loans that are doing okay. Some are these variable rate loans, which right now, variable rate CMBS failures are hitting 20%. That is huge. That's a huge number of failures, okay? So, or delinquencies. So these banks are stressed based off of what's going on right now. Okay, that's what this guy's super smart, whiz kid's telling you. Well, I'm using sarcasm because he's not a whiz kid. Because the fact is, if all these banks are stressed based off of interest rates going on right now, and it's crazy, these stock market analysts are all foaming at the mouth, and CNBC's trying to make all these headlines every time the Fed's about to make a rate decision. And I'm telling people, they're not going to lower rates, and if they do, it's going to be for a very, very brief time right before the election to fool a bunch of people into voting for Biden. That's quite frankly what they want. They want a complete moron in office that is going to sign off on crazy things, crazy expenditures. Because when the Federal Reserve lends money to the government owes it all back with interest. See, the Federal Reserve wants to keep us broke just enough to where we don't realize it, and we're really good little slaves keeping the economy going. There's industries everywhere that are thriving based off the fact that you don't know what's going on. Thank you so much, Douglas, for the super chat. So once we start to figure out the game, you go, okay, this little whiz-bang kid, on CNBC is saying how these banks there's gonna be less failures because they're just stressed. They're just stressed. Well, good news, what's this guy's name? Let's go back to him. Carlos. No, sorry, Brian Graham. Well, Brian Graham, I don't care if you founded something based off of private equity or your daddy's money. We all know the fact of the matter is the Fed's not raising rates. Inflation's getting worse, which means the Fed eventually will have to either raise rates or allow the bond market to keep rising. On a long-term trend, the bond market's going like that. That's my technical sound effect for the bond market rising. Interest rates rising. And so all of these current, for lack of better terms, commercial mortgage securities, they're going to get worse. Now, you've got so many different factors at play. Interest rates are just one thing that are causing the banks to stress. What about delinquencies on credit card payments? Those are rising. And car loans, those are rising. All right, so you have that. Now couple it on top of that with the people that took out those commercial loans going, oh crap, people are starting to slow pay their rent. That's actually going up too. I know it sounds crazy. You're going to find out in about 3 months. See, this is super easy to figure this kind of stuff out because once we reveal the truth, we know where to put our money. Right now, I'm in a holding pattern. Sure, I'm investing in crypto and making swing trades and things like that. And I've got precious metals and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not going out and racing out and buying commercial properties because they're sitting vacant. Days on market are getting longer. I'm waiting. I'm positioning. I'm storing up cash. I'm doing all of these things to get ready. And then when the time comes to pounce, I know it sounds crazy. Most people are going to think I'm nuts because everything's going to be obviously collapsing around us. But all we can go on right now for facts is the mainstream media. How does that suck? All right, just calling it like I see it. I'm super excited about this crash. Don't get me wrong. This is going to be the best party ever. But I need people at the party. So hopefully, type 1 if you're getting ready for this. Let's piss off the algorithm, get some action going down there. And type 2 if you're not. And if you're not, it's cool. Just not going to be partying with all of us cool kids. All right, with that being said, the Economic Ninja. Oh, wait. There it is out.